one of the things I think is particularly fun about spooky season is the various subgenres. Anything from slashers, creature features, and then when you zoom into creature features, whatever monster of the day our characters might be dealing with. So things like vampires, beasts of some kind, werewolves, mummies, zombies. When it comes to zombies, or what we now know to be zombies, there's really only one film that is responsible for what the zombie subgenre has evolved into. And that film is, of course, Night of the Living Dead. Let's discuss. So when I was a kid and I was first aware of this movie terrified me. I couldn't watch it. In fact, I remember very vividly it had come on TV. And at the time, we lived in the back of a barbershop that my parents worked in. And one day, my older sister was there watching with us. And I was going like this the whole time, like peeking, watching certain things. And I happened to come in the room at the time during the scene where there's a child zombie, or the movie calls them ghouls. So I'm going to call them ghouls just to keep it consistent with how this film describes the undead. So there's a child ghoul in a basement, and she's eating like an arm or body part or something like that. And I saw that part, and I remember vividly where she drops the body part and she starts coming towards Ben with the garden tool or whatever. And my first response was like, "Oh, that's gross. Why is she eating that person's arm or whatever it is?" And my sister said, it's so funny thinking back now, because the more I think about it, it's the kind of response I might have said to my little sister if she asked me about this. But my sister's a little bit more, she's more into horror, and in fact, I mentioned this before, she's the one who always gets me to see other horror movies that I might not ordinarily see. And I watch some thrillers and things that veer into horror, but if it weren't for her, I don't know that I would watch some of these movies. But my older sister said, "Oh, it has salt. Humans produce salt, when they sweat and stuff like that. So there's probably salt in the flesh, and that's why maybe it tastes good or whatever it is." I think I must have been 9 or something like that when I saw it, 8 or 9, something like that. And the television we had was a black and white TV, and so at the time, I don't know that I knew the movie was in black and white, but either way, it was scarier to me. Black and white pictures always seem a little bit just a little bit more haunting than if it were in color. But there was something about that struck me about the response, that when I thought more about what it would be like to eat human flesh, how different would it actually be than eating, chicken or, anything else, any other meat that I might have been eating at that time. And I thought, I guess that makes sense. You season it and it's going to taste cool. Like, it didn't matter as much though, still, because I still wasn't comfortable enough to watch the whole movie. But I appreciated my sister being there at that moment, because there was something calming at that time. Having said that, it would be many years before I watched the movie. I only recently watched it for the first time in full, probably maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little bit before that, maybe 6 years ago. Or 7 years, something like that, between 5 and 7 years ago. I thought, man, this is a great movie. And I rewatched it recently, and I still feel it's a well-made movie for a lot of reasons. So I couldn't appreciate as a kid the importance of a character like Ben, played by Dwayne Jones. So for that reason alone, that's one reason. Like, it's an important movie. Having the movie come out in the late 1960s, which is a very tenuous and challenging time in the United States. You have the civil rights movement at its zenith. Black Americans were struggling. And the movie actually, for all of its B-movie qualities, having the movie come out at that particular time positions it as something that is almost metaphorical to what Black Americans were experiencing at that time. I think watching it again recently, it only serves to drive home some of the echoes of the challenges of Black Americans during the 1960s. I know personally for myself as a Black person, there are fears that I still have, and I'm not crazy either. Like there are examples and different things that I've experienced just in my own life that mirror some of the stuff, granted to a lesser extent, but would have been a lot worse in the 1960s. But still, the echoes of that stuff is still very prevalent, very real. For instance, if you've seen the movie, you understand that you have a Black lead character in Ben, who is competent. He's strategic. He is calm under pressure. He's all the things that at that time in movies for Black characters you didn't always get. It was very rare. Of course, if you know anybody who watches horror movies, who has seen even a handful of horror movies, knows about the trope of the Black person dying first. Which reminds me of a really good book. Actually, I have this. I was reading this book about halfway through it. This book called "The Black Guy Dies First," which was funny to me. The title alone was what made me grab it. I said, "What? I'm going to read this book." And it talks about the tropes. You can clock it the first 5 minutes of a movie, or not. But at some point, if there's a group of people trying to survive a threat, and there's Black people in that group, they're going first or sooner. They're not going to make it out of the proceedings. There are a few where some Black characters did, but they're in like later in the, so in like the 70s and 80s, there's a couple horror movies where that does happen, but it was so rare that when you see a character like Ben, and when you see how Ben behaves in the midst of the threat of ghouls outside the house, and when you understand he survives this traumatic night of terror only to suffer a worse fate, and that is something that still rare. But I think when you look at it in the context of the time it came out, it's at once powerful, like the image of a character like that, and having to get through everything he had to get through. And it's frustrating given what lies ahead for him following all the struggles. You can put the struggle for African Americans in the 1960s in place of that. Like Ben is a representative of that same struggle. In this film, it's ghouls, but in the real world at the time, you had to deal with actual civil rights. The other thing is too, watching it now, it feels like a lot has changed, but also very little has changed too. What is this movie about? I've said this before, and I always come back to this when it comes to certain movies, that there's a charm in films that have a very simple premise, limited resources for its characters, and then allows their characters to figure out how to solve the various problems and puzzles that come up. This movie, if for some reason you don't know, it's about a group of people who end up getting stuck in a house and have to fight their way through and survive the night as ghouls from a nearby cemetery approach the house, intent on killing these last humans. We come to understand that this is not an isolated incident. This is something that is happening at various points across the United States. And it's cool because the movie gives us little insights through radio transmissions and things about what is, and news stories and about what's actually happening and how to stop them, or how to stop the threat. And now all Ben and his fellow survivors have to do is make it through the night and then presumably go on their way to safety. Standard B-movie stuff. What elevates this immediately is the inclusion of Ben being the lone Black character and essentially the leader of activities in this film. He's the driving force behind the decisions people make. He's in control for much of the movie. You could look at this as like, this is something that you see on, any zombie show where people are having to fight their way through zombies. They're isolated in like a bunker or whatever it is, one place, and they have to figure out ways to stay alive, and not get attacked, and therefore not turn, so they can live to either fight another day or be somewhere. Hopefully they can be completely safe from the threat. Like I said, I think this movie is responsible for a lot of how we see zombie movies today, right down to the format of it. And to me, look, this is another long running horror franchise. I have a soft spot in my heart for this one. Not just because of Ben. I think it's a well-made, well-told story for the amount of money that George Romero and his team made this film. It feels like the spirit of this film feels very independent, and you can see, you can see, if you watch closely, you can see certain cracks in the armor, if you will, of this movie, certain angles, certain things like that, and even certain ways that the acting is on display. But I think more so the acting of the ghouls, the humans, the regular flesh and blood survivors. Everyone there was really good, especially Dwayne Jones. I think he's easily a standout in this movie. He has the most going on, the most to deal with. Of course, he meets opposition, and all of his fellow survivors who give him flack for how he's handling the situation, they're all good too. But my only issues come in the form of the actors who are playing some of the ghouls, and how there seemed to be an inconsistency with how they moved. I liked that they were slower and faster at some certain points too. Like they picked and chose when they wanted to speed up and when they wanted to slow down and do different things. The other thing that's cool about this, I think, was the choice, the decision that George Romero and his team made to shoot this in black and white. By 1968, of course, there were plenty of color films. The choice to shoot this in black and white works. Whether it's, I'm not quite sure fully why that was, whether it's for financial reasons or what, but it adds to the tone. It adds to the scariness of it, the spookiness of it. Shadows are shadows. Shadows are real shadows, and things just look more unsettling. It's not a standard B movie, that's for sure. It definitely breaks the mold. I've seen it stated that this film is a pretty good statement on race, on survival, and life as a black person in America. And I tend to agree with that. The idea that you have to be constantly vigilant feels very real to me. I think that's what Ben is doing in this movie. And what's cool about it, I think this most recent watch, I watched it with the lens of like, okay, if I'm Ben and I've lived a life where I've had to be constantly vigilant already before the ghouls try to come and attack, it's easy to see now, well, I have the experience. I have a lived experience of what it is to be constantly vigilant. Even when you're in supposedly comfortable places, you can't fully relax, because the idea that there is some sort of threat, even if it's unintentional, around the corner is just, it's something that's for real. Like, this is not something that I often talk about. I was having a discussion with a friend about this recently, also black. We were discussing, hey, what's up with this race conversation? Does it matter in these various areas? And there's a lot of places it doesn't matter. But to pretend it doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not there. I think that if you intentionally don't talk about it, it's still something that's there. Personally, I try not to bring it up because it's not the baseline. When things happen that feel unfavorable, my first thought isn't because, oh, they're racist. That's not the but I think that there's something to be said though for I've been in a lot of spaces where I've been one of the few black people, if not the only black person in a room, and feel mostly safe and then have certain things happen in it, like in a meeting and at work or whatever it is, where it's not conscious, but these things you're thrown under the bus for whatever reason. But that, at least for me, this is my experience, that if anyone else at this company or wherever the place is were in a similar situation, that they would not be dealing with what I had to deal with. And you just try to just keep it moving. Like, okay, all right, well, yeah, that happened, whatever, keep going, whatever. And what you keep doing. So if I'm Ben and I've had experiences like that, there's a layer of it where it's like the best person to lead was uniquely suited to get through that situation. And Ben was easily the best person. No one else in that house had the lived experience that Ben did. It makes the story that much cooler if your character, your hero, has some experience that allows them to tackle this challenge. Not that they have to be great at it immediately, but it's something that helps them overcome obstacles in a way that other characters in the story couldn't. For instance, I was just talking about weapons recently, and how the contractor, Josh Brolin, who is a construction contractor or whatever it is, his skill, his job was uniquely suited for the plot of that movie to figure out what happened to his son. Similarly here, Ben's experience as a black man in America, having to be constantly on watch to make sure he survived the various pitfalls living in this country during the 1960s, was uniquely suited for him to be in this house and trying to survive. Right? He may not have had to use weapons and things in his regular life, but it's the idea of survival. It just translates into from social survival to actual survival. So the spirit of it is the same, even though the methods may be a little bit different. But he's moving from the same spirit of, do whatever it is, make sure you do whatever it is to stay alive. Watching this movie now, it mostly holds up. Aside from the slight chinks in the armor, weird camera angles, slightly off performance, acting from the ghoul performers, this movie mostly holds up. And it's still unsettling because of, look, again, the black and white nature. The look of the ghouls is very simple, and it works. There are a couple shots in there that really add to the tension and suspense. A half-eaten corpse in the house, for instance. The way it was, the prosthetics involved, like the practical effects on display for that, really cool. It's still effective. And the way the camera does things to make us feel the shock that Barbara feels when she first sees this half-eaten corpse. It's kind of wild. You're like, whoa, what's going? The struggles, the physical struggles with the ghouls. There are parts where it's not as kinetic, it doesn't hit as hard as you want it to, and that probably is a limitation on like the way they were trying to shoot it so that people didn't get hurt or whatever it is. But the way it was blocked and the way it was shot is effective still. I think the scariest thing about it, though, is, again, how it echoes. Something about it feels very like real life. You can do everything right and still get messed up. The idea that no good deed goes unpunished. You can do the best, most thrilling, the most monumental, survive the most epic challenges, and then at the end still not be appreciated and not be even acknowledged. Something about Ben's Ben's journey in this movie feels very resonant for me. Him being in this position where he's not only leading and trying to make sure that the fellow survivors stay alive. He actually does care about, but also he wants to survive too. He's not about to die because your foolishness, and yet at the end of the day, it's almost like what did it matter? Didn't matter as much. And I think sometimes that's what it feels like being black in this country and being black at certain jobs and things. Like, I know I've felt like I've done a lot of work, pretty good work at jobs, only for at the end of the day things to not work out. But that's only for me, though, not anyone else at the at the company. It's just me. So it's kind of hard, even when you're told, oh, this is a team effort and this is we're going to make sure we're all on the same page here when you're the one being punished for for whatever the company shortfallings are. They actually had very little to do with me. I was punished for something that was already a problem when I came on board. I really resonated with Ben's story in this movie. And that's just on the more serious end of it. But really, Night of the Living Dead is a classic through and through. And it's always a good watch. If you've reached the end of this video at this point, thank you for your time. Again, I really appreciate your listening and hanging out. But that's going to do it for this review. This conversation really is less of a review and more conversation about this movie. Stay tuned. More spooky season reviews on the way. In the meantime, I'm out of here. So please take care, and I'll see you in the next video.